and Sal Vetri, giving you a first look at week 4, taking a peek, a cursory look at salaries, going to break down snap counts, routes, targets, carries, everything from week 3, and apply it, of course, to week 4. Got a whole lot coming up in today's show, and of course, glad to have you with us. What's up, Sal?
What's going on, my man? Yeah, no, it was a fun week, I thought, on the weekend. Sunday slate went pretty well. It was lots of things going on, more injuries that we can break down, and I think that this is definitely a tighter slate in terms of just the overall salaries than last week for sure. Last week was just crazy all week long in terms of more and more opening up throughout the week. So fun to have a new, fresh start. And this is like the exciting part of the week up until like right now. I like it in the beginning, and then right as the slate starts, but just kind of seeing the salaries and seeing what you can do with it is pretty exciting.
You had a solid week 3?
Yeah, week 3 was good. And then I was talking I filled in on the Sunday night live before lock, and I was saying how it could have been even better, but a lot better. Had in one of my like mid stake 3 maxes last second, like before lock, terrible tinker 2v2 take out Keenan Allen and Dalvin Cook, put in Ezekiel Elliott, Chris Carson, and I just couldn't sleep. It was one of those that literally was just like grabbing my gut all night. It was a difference of like a decent 4-figure difference in that stakes, and I was just like, this is terrible. This is awful.
Yeah, that's brutal, because if you had Elliott and Carson, you could have a decent cashing lineup, but you're not winning anything big.
That's exactly what happened. Yep.
Right, no question. Yeah, I had a good week, but the guys that could have made it a lot better were Chris Godwin and John Brown. John Brown, pretty disappointing, but I'll keep going back to the guy, assuming that he's still going to be a preferred target of Josh Allen, and I think he will. But that's okay. We've got a lot to get into, and we've got the salaries for week 4. I already took a good look at what we've got going on, and I tell you what, from a positional standpoint, there are, I'd say, I have written down, and these are, I removed a few because I don't want to get out of control, but I have 9 quarterbacks that I'm going to be doing a lot more digging into, 10 running backs, and then a ton of receivers. Tight end, on the other hand, maybe like 7 or 8 of them. Now, these guys will get narrowed down throughout the week. Some things will open up, and then other positions will constrict. When you look at this first glance on the slate, is it deep to you? 12 games, by the way, a couple buys.
Yeah, it's literally, it's funny you're saying that. I'm counting this. I have 9 quarterbacks jotted down with some sort of interest. I have 11 running backs, and then I have 25 wide receivers right now. So it's the exact same as you're saying. It's a week where we don't have, and honestly, myself and just tons of people last week just sleeping on Alvin Kamara, but I mean, has a career high in snaps. We don't have Alvin Kamara. We're not going to have Saquon Barkley. Just so many guys, no Zeke. There's just so many guys at the running back spot that you rely on that aren't there. And you're kind of stuck with a lot of middling running backs that you have to choose from. So yeah, it's a week where it seems like a wide receiver in the flex is going to be more viable than usual. So I think wide receiver is exactly where it's deep, quarterback a little bit as well. And then running back, it doesn't seem like you have all that many options.
Pretty incredible, by the way. I also have 25 wide receivers.
Wow. Yeah. Holy cow.
I removed a couple of them. You know, at first I'll toss them all in there and then say, all right, you know what? I don't see any way I get to this guy or any way I get to this guy. But there's definitely some value. Let's just jump into it. But before we do, the NFL Strategy Show is presented by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. If you haven't signed up yet, if you're new to the stream, if you're new to the Awesemo YouTube, first of all, welcome. Second of all, head over to Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports and sign up through us to get up to $30 in Yahoo Sports rewards points, which are as good as cash to be used on the site to play and win money. Go to awesemo.com. It's AWESEMO. Once you get there, you'll see the MLB tab. And the reason I do this roundabout way is because we have some trouble with posting links in the YouTube chat. Go to the MLB tab, click on articles. You'll see the Spotlight Hitters article right there at the top. And if you click on that, it is a free article. You can sign up using the Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports link. And when you deposit, that'll get you up to $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points. So awesemo.com, MLB tab. In the articles, you'll see Spotlight Hitters, and the link on the free article is right there for you to sign up and get started at Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. They've got the $400,000 baller with $50K to first and a really nice payout structure, 30 to second, 20 to third, 15 to fourth, 10, 5. So, you don't come in first place, you're still having a hell of a good week. And of course, some management-free contests as well, which means that all of the money paid in by the player comes back out to the player. And I always like to mention this: if you're playing with a smaller bankroll, $25,000 prize pool on the $1 entry, $4K to first. So a lot going on at Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports this week in NFL, and of course MLB and golf contests as well. Sign up through us in the Spotlight Hitters article. You'll see the link and get your $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points, them YSRPs. All right, Sal, you ready to jump into this?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so before we get to salaries, I want to ask you just about a few injuries. Manny, Laura, and I discussed it on yesterday's show. If you missed that, you can find it right on the homepage, youtube.com/Awesemo. But the Saquon Barkley injury, number one, how does that affect this team, and how does it affect guys like Wayne Gallman?
Yeah, so it's clearly going to affect the team huge. Just probably the most talented back with the ball in his hands in the entire league, most versatile back, I would say, as well. Just shedding tackles. It's huge for the team. Danny Dimes looked really well, just looked great. But what you're getting in Wayne Gallman is a guy who can pass protect. He's going to stay on the field. So the team overall, yeah, takes a big hit, but you like what you saw getting involved. Sterling Shepard last week, Engram still looking great. So it's just a matter of how often that they're going to need to heavily rely on a running game. I do think that Wayne Gallman is going to be very viable. The price tag is just great. They didn't pull him up enough. Washington's run D has not been by far at all really that great for this matchup right here. You're going to have Saquon out for a month or so, maybe even more. He had the same injury before the Big Ten championship game. He came back in like two and a half weeks, I think it was. But yeah, Wayne Gallman is a really good pass protector. He's an average to bad receiving back, and he's an average running back over the past 3 years of his career. So it's a good spot at 4,600, I think, when you consider the matchup and what it allows you to do with your positionality, especially in a week where running back seems pretty thin. I think something to emphasize, though, is definitely the fact that he's just gonna have to stay on the field because nobody else in this team is as good of a pass protector as he is, and as obviously Saquon was. So yeah, I think for him specifically, this week at least looks really good. Moving forward, it's really going to be a pick your spot depending on what the price tag is on him. If it gets in the 5K range, maybe you avoid it. But 4,600 it's just really favorable, I think.
Do you make anything of the workload that he saw after Saquon Barkley went out?
I don't know. I mean, I guess a little bit is just reluctancy maybe to give him the ball in certain situations in a close game. But I don't think I make too much of it in just sort of that smaller sample of like the second half where, I mean, it was a very pass-heavy script for most of it. So I'm not going to read too much into that game. But, yeah, just looking into it, it seems like an average running back who should be on the field a lot.
He still saw 63% of snaps.
Yeah.
And if you compare that to Saquon Barkley, who saw 37%, Gallman saw every snap that he wasn't out there, assuming they weren't lined up with two backs. But that's encouraging to me. Opportunities, everything, Sal. And this isn't either you or myself saying that we think he's going to come out and handle a Barkley-like workload. Of course not. But he's also, half the price in a good matchup. I'm with you. I think this is a week where you have to consider him. And you know what? If you're shallow in seasonal leagues, I'd be scooping him up, especially if you're a Barkley owner, because it's really hard to fill that void, especially being that the position's super shallow on the waiver wire. T.Y. Hilton, here's another one. He still had a big game, so anybody that played him still wasn't hurt by this injury. And actually, he tweaked it, I believe, on that touchdown. So all of that was good for last week, but Hilton has been one of the most unheralded receivers in the league this year in an offense that lost Andrew Luck prior to the season. He has been on the field for 90% of snaps in each of the first two games. Of course, only 52% in last week's game, but he has just been unbelievably consistent and impressive. He's been a safety valve to some extent, even on short passes for Jacoby Brissett. Looking at last week, though, really amusing to me, Sal, because he had 10 targets. The rest of the receivers, Paris Campbell, 3. Deon Cain, 3. Zach Pascal, 3. And then Doyle and Ebron both had 4. Mo Alley-Cox even had 2. Nyheim Hines, 4. Marlon Mack, 3. Well, why do I bring this up? Bring it up because T.Y. Hilton has clearly been the top guy. He's led the team in targets by a mile in weeks 1 and 3 and also in week 2. Now, if he misses this game, how are we going to see how are we going to see these voided looks distributed and voided snaps distributed throughout the rest of the offense? Do you think it will be Zach Pascal to get a lot of work here?
Yeah, so I think the guy who probably sees the most just overall snaps on the field will probably be Deon Cain.
Yeah.
That's how it's been for like the past 2 weeks. He led all wide receivers. Obviously, Ty going down in the first half. 10 targets in the first half was ridiculous. 56%, yeah, it was in the first half. It was just nuts. It's 56. And right now, the news on T.Y. Hilton, at least this morning, it doesn't look favorable that he'll be suiting up for Sunday. So
whenever you aggravate that injury, it surely seems that you're missing at least a week.
Yeah, exactly. So like Deon Cain, 56% of the snaps last week, Campbell 45, Pascal 44. They have been running a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. But yeah, like Luffy said, you have 3 targets for each of those guys last week. Pascal was one to get into the end zone. I think, in my opinion, the most talented is Deon Cain. You have the young kid Campbell who scored last week. So in terms of like the way that this pricing is, if I was to look for somebody to fill in, have a lot of opportunity, and just be a playmaker, it would be Deon Cain. He probably fits like a T.Y. Hilton mold the most for what that offense does. But it's probably a stay away spot for me. But Deon Cain is like, I think 3,200 this week. All these guys are cheap. If anything, I'd probably go to Cain.
What about Paris Campbell, who saw 29% of snaps in week 1, 25 in week 2, and then 45. He basically saw his snap count double in week 3. From a target standpoint, it was not at all encouraging, only 3. But I mean, it's at least worth pointing out that he also saw his workload, or he also saw his time on the field increase quite a bit last week.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I mean, this is a kid that they drafted with high expectations. I guess the only reason that I don't get there as much maybe is just really price point. Like he'll be on the field. He'll probably, I would expect him to run probably the second most routes right there. It's going to be close because they run so much 3 wide receiver set, but it's just really a pricing thing when it comes down to that. I'd rather go to Cain, who is I think like $1,700 cheaper, almost min price on this slate. And somebody will be on the outside with big play upside. Campbell, more of like a bigger body wide receiver around the red zone, which is good. But it's also in terms of DFS, 4,900 to 3,200 if you wanted to get there. They'll both be on the field a lot. So I think both are viable this week. I would just go down to Cain personally.
Okay. Yeah. Deon Cain ran the most routes of any Colts receiver last game, 27. Of course, Hilton would have run like 55 or something crazy. Campbell at 18, Pascal at 14. So, if you want to prorate them out, I think you're right. Deon Cain would be the guy. But do you need to go there? Probably not. Is it a decent spot against Oakland? It is. But we can get there a little bit more when we talk about wide receivers. And then Julian Edelman. What do you make of this? Going up against, that's right, the 3-0 Buffalo Bills, Sal. 3-0 Bills. Right now, Julian Edelman, we know that the x-rays came back negative on his ribs. He hasn't been ruled out. They say it's not necessarily a serious injury, but do you need to rush somebody like Edelman back? The answer is probably no, but Antonio Brown's gone. Let's assume that Edelman doesn't play, and you've got, sub 6K Josh Gordon on DraftKings. Of course, Philip Dorsett, who's been very involved and has looked very competent. He's caught all but one of his 14 targets this season. Not sustainable, but still good to see. What would you make of this team? You can include the running backs as well if Edelman is out.
Yeah, I mean, if Edelman is out, I think it gives, just in terms of like upside for GPP, I think it gives a lot more upside to Rex Burkhead and James White in terms of like just short passes. And really, when you look at the Buffalo defense, they want to play a zone. So like Dorsett, he played a ton of snaps last week. I'm pulling it up right now. He played, I think, 92% of the snaps last week, which is fantastic just in terms of the usage on the field. He saw 7 targets. So he's actually involved in this offense. It's sort of elite usage for a guy at his price tag, how often he's on the field, but no AB now. But this offense this defense is kind of going to set it up so you can't beat them deep. So we saw it last week with just Tyler Boyd. Tyler Boyd still had a very good floor to just median game, really, against this defense because they'll give you those short passes to a slot wide receiver. So if Edelman doesn't suit up, I would expect maybe Jacoby Myers, the rookie, to take over a lot more slot work. When he's come on the field, it's usually to spell Edelman. It's not much this year, but he lines up in the slot primarily. Not really going to get any interest there, though. So it's kind of a stay away spot if Edelman doesn't get in. maybe get a little bit of a bump to the backfield on a thin week at running back. If Edelman's in, I'll have interest in him. It's just that it's his own defense, so it suppresses Phillip Dorsett. Josh Gordon is there at a very favorable price point. I think that's fine, but he'll also have a decent shadow matchup against him. I mean, the targets have to go somewhere for Brady, so I would probably lean on Gordon, if anybody, if Edelman's out, just because I don't know if I trust too much Jacoby Myers in the slot filling in.
Yeah, and I think you could see a boost a little bit for James White just on short yardage opportunities. But, I'm reading some comments in chat about guys, not being good from an earlier discussion. Sometimes volume is just volume over efficiency, in my opinion. If the opportunities are there and you're cheap, I'm not worried about whether or not they can average 6 yards per carry. Perfect example, and I'm not a big Frank Gore guy at all, but Frank Gore produced last week because he was on the field so much, given that Devin Singletary was out. So, look, those are instances where I'm just willing to roll the dice and hope that they're going to be on the field. So that's how I see it.
Yeah, and if it is like Gallman, I mean, he's a home favorite, and Washington's ranked second worst in PFFs right now. So it's a really good spot, too, for him.
Yep. I was trying to pull up how Buffalo ranks against pass-catching running backs this season. According to Football Outsiders, Buffalo is 16th against pass. So right in the middle of the league. Not surprising. They're a decent defense. However, this offense for the Patriots, I can't say I'm terribly worried about it. Yeah. Okay, and then two more. Just on the defensive side, Malik Hooker, torn meniscus, out for the Colts. That's a pretty big injury. He's played well this season. And Keanu Neal also tears his ACL, gets a damn penalty on the play. He's out. Another safety for the Atlanta Falcons. How do you see this affecting them? We can talk. We'll stay focused on this week. Atlanta against Tennessee in Atlanta, and Indianapolis at home against the Oakland Raiders.
Yeah, I mean, I think it more so affects, at least for like this week specifically, I think it more so affects Indy, a zone defense that really relied on just Hooker back there. So I think that it'll affect that team overall, but this week more so just because I think in terms of their offenses, you have up the middle of the field like a Darren Waller or just Tyrell on the outside. It's more to kind of handle than I would say with the Titans offenses right now, especially with some Mariota woes. We saw them have Adam Humphries get used in the middle of the field and Delaney Walker, and they're really narrow right now overall. So I think it's just easier to defend and get away with for Atlanta. So I would say both of those guys on the year is obviously a loss when you ever have somebody of those caliber just going down on defense. But for this week, a little bit definitely favors both offenses going up against them. A little bit in terms of Oakland gives me a little bit of a bump, but not too much. Like I don't like Tennessee that much more because of it. I don't think I bump up Adam Humphrey, maybe Delaney Walker a little bit, but nothing really.
Okay. Yeah, I think Delaney gets a small bump, but I'm a fan of Delaney Walker to begin with because number one, this offensive line has struggled. I think he took 10 sacks or something insane on Thursday Night Football. That cannot continue to happen. And if they're going to continue to struggle to be able to hold on to the ball, if the pocket's going to collapse, I think you continue to see more work from Walker. I saw a season high 9 targets last time out, and he's clearly Marcus Mariota's favorite target.
Yeah, and I think the thing that was really nice to see, I mean, Mariota was getting hit nonstop. They said they wanted to get Humphreys more involved. He did. He had 6 catches, 93 yards, but you still saw Delaney Walker stay involved for just a season high in terms of receptions and yardage. So it was good to see something that there was a concern if both can kind of coexist in the middle of the field, and they definitely did. And it seems like that's all the offense where it's coming from.
Yeah, and the Titans will get Taylor Lewan back after week 4. I don't think it's going to fix this offense by any stretch, but getting a Pro Bowl tackle back should certainly help them at least a little bit. All right, Sal, let's go ahead and jump into some positions here. Take our first look at salaries here on the Strategy Show. Quarterback position, of course, you have Patrick Mahomes at the top. He is the definition of unstoppable. He has 30-plus Draftkings points in all 3 games this season. Wouldn't be surprised to see him do it again this week against Detroit. And looking back, that Detroit defense may have held the Eagles to 24 points, but make no mistake about it. That Eagles team dropped 8 passes. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside dropped one at the 1-yard line. There were two awful offensive pass interference calls, and by that I mean they should not have done them, not that they shouldn't have been called. And Nelson Aguilar with the fumble, Matt Collins with several drops. Point being is that the Eagles should have scored a lot more points in that game. I can't say I'm terribly worried about Patrick Mahomes' ability to produce in this one, but of course it comes down to salary, and he is the most expensive quarterback across the board.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it comes down to. I mean, they have another total creeping and hovering right around 30 points. Detroit is probably, early reports are at least showing, going to be without Darius Slay, which is not good for them. It's not like Patrick Mahomes needed any help, but that's clearly going to be even better for these wide receivers in Kansas City. So if you want to get to it, just get to it at 7,500. Like in terms of cash games, I usually pay down at quarterback just to get more skilled position players or just more trustworthy ones. But in a tournament, yeah, it's never a bad idea to go to Patrick Mahomes. I mean, you just feel it's crazy to feel like you need or that you're going to get 303 touchdowns out of a guy, and you just expect it at this point. It's just nuts to say that, but that's what you're going to get out of this guy. And Detroit's defense right now, just pass coverage, right around middle of the pack, and obviously losing Darius Slay will make that a lot worse, and facing Patrick Mahomes. So if you want to get there at the price point, he's one of the 9 interests that I have right now that we were talking about earlier, and he's probably going to stay that way every single week.
Yep, pretty much. And I have no problem going back to him whenever necessary. Last week, I think I only had like 7%, but that was because there were so many quality quarterbacks that were discounted, and that ended up paying off. It doesn't always pay off, though, and we'll get to some of these cheap guys. But talk to me about the mid-range first. Some of the guys that I've jotted down to do further research into are Deshaun Watson, Phillip Rivers, Russell Wilson, Jared Goff, and Kyler Murray, all of whom are above 6K. Murray will probably be erased from my list, but based on that pace that they play and the opportunities in the passing game, it does always make for an interesting team stack with guys like Kirk and Fitzgerald getting a lot of opportunities from week to week.
Yeah, this is why it's a little bit tougher to get to Mahomes, because that range is exactly where I'm probably going to be focusing all week. Probably a little bit tighter around Goff, Phillip Rivers, and Wilson. I mean, we've just seen every single week what quarterbacks have done to Miami. Even in blowouts, they're still going and touching 30 fantasy points. We've seen it now 3 weeks in a row. Tom Brady had 25 as a bad week for a quarterback against them. Jared Goff is going to be 6,300, the most expensive of those three I named. And the thing here that's nice is his team total is at right now, last I checked, 29.75, at least it opened at. And he's facing a very stout run D in Tampa Bay. Like, this run defense is legit. Vita Vea looks fantastic. Everybody up front, the front seven really is dangerous. And when you have a stout run defense and just not the greatest running game right now with Todd Gurley limited, whatever it might be, and a bottom 10 pass defense so far in Tampa Bay, yeah, Jared Goff's going to have a lot on his shoulders. So I like this spot for him, especially because it's a favorable matchup. Phillip Rivers, great matchup against Miami. And then Russell Wilson, yeah. Russell Wilson is way too cheap on this slate. Like, I was expecting to see him like 66, 6,800 coming in against Arizona, which really any skilled position player has just been torching this defense, whether it's old tight ends, whether it's rookie quarterbacks or just backup quarterbacks. It's crazy. So now you get Russell Wilson, who's coming off of like one of the best games in his career, if not like the best game in his career numbers wise, getting involved on the ground more this year, as we've seen through 3 weeks, something that he wasn't doing all that much last week in the red zone. We saw him run 2 in last week. So good to see $6,100 Russell Wilson right now on a slate where you have a Phillip Rivers playing Miami. He still seems like just the best player early in the week. 26 total looks good. The pace is going to be fantastic against Arizona, and their defense is just so atrocious. Like, Chris Jones is the only decent cornerback in this secondary. You have Budda Baker, who's fine as a safety, but then like 4 or 5 other defenders right now in Pro Football Focus just rating as some of the worst in the league.
Yeah. Where would you rank him among your quarterbacks right now? I know it's a preliminary look, but where do you have him ranked right now?
Yeah, so I have right now Russell Wilson 1, Rivers 2, Goff 3, and that's exactly what you said. Just a prelim look at this. That's where it is. So right now he's number 1 for me, just on Tuesday.
Okay. Now, a couple of these guys that stand out. What do you make of? I don't really think we need to get too much into Phillip Rivers, right? I mean, it's at this point you know that they're 16-point favorites on the road. It's going to get ugly. The Chargers have been disappointing late in games, but it doesn't matter. The offense is so heavily concentrated towards Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler that you can feel pretty comfortable with that. What about Deshaun Watson? He's got a decent season so far, but I don't really necessarily know how much of a priority he is for this week. So here's the way I see it. Carolina does play at a fast pace, and that's pretty beneficial. Another thing too is that this defense, what I saw last week, I don't take away too much. Kyler Murray is still, he's got happy feet in the pocket, man, and he hasn't looked like he's a rookie. He's got a ways to go, put it that way. But 46-point over under. They have a 25.5 implied total. They're 5-point favorites. What do you do with Deshaun Watson at 6,400?
Yeah. So right now, the way I go through it, I make like a yes, maybe no. He was originally a yes, and then just looking into like the players around him, really, he just became a maybe really quick. So Carolina's been really good at getting pressure so far this year, and that's something that is a big issue for the Houston offensive line every single week. The only good thing about and it's not really good, but like Deshaun Watson is good when he's moving around, I would say. Like one of the few quarterbacks who's very good outside of the pocket. So he's being forced outside of the pocket a ton. You would rather not have him running for his life, but he's a fantasy quarterback that's fantastic because he has the rushing upside. But on a slate like this, he quickly became a maybe for me, and he's probably not somebody I get to unless I'm doing just full game stacks and get a couple pieces of him because of the Goff, Rivers, and Wilson range right below him at the exact same price points and just favoring those guys a little bit more right now. You touched on it. Yeah. Right now, Carolina's just secondary is ranking out pretty well through 3 weeks.
I think they're top 10, right?
Yeah. I think they're top 10 right now. And they actually look pretty good through a couple of weeks, but you did have in there Jared Goff's and maybe it's partially because of them. Jared Goff's just worst completion percentage game ever. He was just all over the place. And then you had last week Kyler Murray. So some of that skewed a little bit. But yeah, I would say that it's definitely not a favorable matchup for Watson. The only thing that keeps him, I would say, a maybe for me right now is because he has the rushing upside to get you 10 fantasy points just on the ground.
Right. Daniel Jones had a really impressive NFL debut. And I don't know what type. So my guess is when we get ownership, Daniel Jones will be pretty popular. Coming off a big week against Tampa Bay. Now he's facing the Washington Redskins, who have yet to win a game. When you're taking a look at this Redskins defense as a whole, Pro Football Focus has them towards the bottom, 29th in overall defense. When you're looking at pass rush, they are towards the bottom as well. I believe they're 31st. And then in coverage, they have not been all that much better, sitting at 23rd. Daniel Jones coming off a great week. He does lose Saquon Barkley, though, and it will be a lot easier to game plan against this Giants team. Are there enough heroics left for him to do it 2 weeks in a row against the Skins?
Yeah, I think he's viable on this slate because of the price point. Like if you're going to build a different type of lineup and you just have a couple lineups and you have other places to go. Right now he's listed as one of those maybes out of the 9 quarterbacks for me. Yeah, you touch on it. Like we saw it literally last night. This secondary for Washington's bad. Like Josh Norman is really bad right now. He needs a lot of safety help on almost every single play when he's one-on-one with any decent wide receiver. The good news is Sterling Shepard's going to stay in the slot 90% of the time. So Josh Norman will have to face Benny Fowler. So in terms of the overall upside of this offense, yeah, Saquon going down is going to be a bigger hit than yesterday really showed. And sort of those heroics on Daniel Jones, it was really all on him. So I think, yeah, Evan Engram and Sterling Shepard keep this offense afloat enough against a really porous secondary overall rush. They'll have time that I think he's viable this week at the price tag. I think that price tag is definitely too cheap by probably $500.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do think he'll be very popular though, so that might be some reason to potentially look elsewhere. Redskins this year 27th in DVOA against opposing tight ends. So getting a guy like Evan Engram in there is in my opinion always viable. I mean, look no other than a young quarterback to rely on somebody like Evan Engram, especially after Saquon Barkley goes down and he's going to have to deal with Wayne Gallman. I mean, that does not bode well for him even a little bit. Last year, the Redskins were definitely better against opposing tight ends, but I still look at this spot and say, regardless of matchup, even Evan Engram has to get peppered with targets.
Yep. Yeah, I completely agree. It's only going to help with Saquon out because Gallman's not anywhere near, he's a below average pass catching running back.
All right. So here's a good one. What do you make of Matthew Stafford at home against the Kansas City Chiefs in a game where they will most certainly have to at least try to keep up. 53.5 over under, as was the case last week between the Ravens and Chiefs. This is also the highest over under on the slate by 3 points. Matthew Stafford has, shown some promise, but we know who Matthew Stafford is. I think it's the easiest way to put it is we know what we're getting from Matthew Stafford. Generally speaking, he's going to put up, somewhat decent numbers, but nothing ever that impressive. But against Kansas City, now he has an opportunity to at least air the ball out in order to try and pace Patrick Mahomes, which won't happen, but he'll at least try. What do you think of that $5,500 price tag? Priced very similarly to Winston, Josh Allen, and of course Daniel Jones too.
Yeah, I think it's a nice spot as a home, just underdog in terms of like looking at bigger samples. Like that's usually a beneficial spot for quarterbacks. For me, though, it's just tough. I think I actually like Daniel Jones a little bit better for cheaper. I guess the ownership, if it's a big gap, maybe we change that a little bit. But yeah, right now, Stafford, like the only reason you would like him here is because you expect more passing attempts. So on a game script that's usually going to say he throws 30 times in most neutral situations, I would expect probably around 40, 45 pass attempts if they're trailing for most of this. So yeah, whenever you have a quarterback approaching 40, 45 pass attempts at that price point, it's clearly appealing. We saw them finally get Marvin Jones Jr. last week involved, and they prioritized him over Kenny Golladay, which was interesting, and it worked well. So having those two guys on the outside, especially with Hockenson on the inside, I think it's an overall good spot for him, and maybe something I have to look at more because right now I have him as a no. But yeah, a quarterback is so deep. I think that for me, I'm probably just going to stay in the mid range. But yeah, home underdog, it looks pretty good against a secondary that is definitely improved, but probably more so closer to the middle of the pack than actually good.
I feel like I probably could have made an argument for Jacoby Brissett if T.Y. Hilton was likely to play. He really hasn't been bad this year, but take him out of the offense, and it certainly hurts them. I'd lean more towards Marlon Mack. A couple of other guys, Kyle Allen coming off a great performance. A much tougher matchup, though, much tougher assignment against Houston in NRG Stadium, so that's kind of tough. Just looking at some of these other cheap guys, Tampa, Winston's got the Rams in LA, Josh Allen against the Patriots in Buffalo. Any cheap quarterbacks we haven't touched on yet that you like?
I guess there's two. Matt Ryan stands out for me a little bit. Tennessee secondary is just so bad. I mean, Malcom Butler right now, if you just look at his rankings on really any website, it's some of the league's worst right now. Adore Jackson is below average. The only good thing in their secondary for the most part is Logan Ryan in the slot, and we know that Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones will play on the outside, so it benefits a lot. Matt Ryan in this offense, they have a nice total right now of 25. So I do like Matt Ryan at that price point. And then I guess worth a mention is Case Keenum at 4,900 against the Giants, just because how bad they've been. And because I imagine that you're going to have a lot of Terry McLaurin lineups. So there's an opportunity to correlate a little bit there, but it's mainly just a price play and the matchup more so than trusting Case Keenum in any of my lineups.
Yeah, I suppose Keenum could be in play. Terry McLaurin as well. Tell you what, I don't know if you've been watching him, but
yeah.
In week one, I'm like, all right, another busted coverage against the Eagles. What do you expect? But even on a play that got called back yesterday, he shedded 2 tackles, or it might be shed 2 tackles. Yeah, I don't think there's a shedded. He shed 2 tackles and ended up finishing with 6 for 70 and a touchdown against what I would consider to be the best defense in the league. He's scored in 3 straight games. He's averaging 8 targets per contest. Terry McLaurin looks legitimate.
Yeah, Terry McLaurin looks legit, and his price tag has just been broken literally every single week on DraftKings. Obviously, he can't get changed from what he did Monday night. I was hoping he would do nothing on Monday night just to kind of have him at a little bit of lower ownership, but I expect him to be like a top 5 owned player when it's all said and done this week. He's just looked like absolutely phenomenal. Now he gets just a matchup against the Giants, who've given up top 3 fantasy points to the wide receivers through 3 weeks. This guy's on the field nonstop, 92% of the snaps. He has a 47% share of Washington's air yards. It's like his show in that offense right now. And it's honestly fun to watch. Like he looks legit, and kind of doing it last night against a defense like Chicago when they know you're the only thing that can kind of hurt them in the secondary. And he was still able to do it. So yeah, this kid looks legit and way too cheap.
I think so too. All right, let's go to running backs here. Couple off the top. Let's start with Austin Eckler and Christian McCaffrey. Eckler going up against the Dolphins, monster favorites on the road. I mean, everything that we've seen from the Dolphins, it's pretty obvious that nobody should be surprised. Right now, the Chargers have a slate high 30.5 implied total. There is no bigger favorite on the slate at 16.5 on the road. Of course, everything points in favor of the Chargers and points in the direction of guys like Eckler and Allen having big games. I thought it was interesting, though. The Chargers, in a very competitive game last week, for all intents and purposes, abandoned the run towards the end of that game. And personally, I think it came back to haunt them. Now, I get that Eckler, the passes to Eckler is an extension of the run game, and he did see 7 targets. But I was a little bit surprised to see that they completely went away from that just because he wasn't finding much on the ground. But anyway, you'd have to think that in a spot like this, Eckler has no problem bouncing back. Snap counts, he played 65%, a little bit less than he had earlier in weeks 1 and week 2, but still the focal point of the offense. I will again point out, though, that Justin Jackson inherited all of those snaps that would have gone to Eckler the week before. But talk to me about Eckler here as 16.5-point favorites with the highest total on the slate.
Yeah, it's a great spot. I mean, the price point comes up 8,000. Seems like it is expensive for a guy like that, but when you factor in matchup and relative everybody else on the slate, it's fine in my opinion. Miami's giving up like over 250 rushing yards a game, or right around 236 actually might be exactly rushing yards per game right now. It increased from their 195 a game through the first 2 weeks after Dallas had 200-yard rushers on them. So yeah, I think both backs here are very viable and in play. I think the price tag is warranted for Eckler. And here's the thing, like if he's last week, yeah, they abandoned the run, doesn't look great. Overall, not a lot of attempts for him and Jackson. But in a week where he has 80 total yards and 7 catches, if that's like the floor week for Eckler, we're in for like something really good until Melvin Gordon comes back. So this spot overall is fantastic. No defense is even close to the amount of rushing yards Miami's given up. A lot of that is game flow based. A lot of that is just they're not good. So yeah, Eckler I think is fine at $8,000. He's probably like one of the top 3 or 4 running back plays on the slate.
I'm with you. And again, when you're getting targeted that often and you don't drop passes, he's got 20 targets on the season, 19 receptions. I'll take that over a 5-yard rush any day of the week. And I think you're going to see that regardless of score early on. The only thing is, like, will Justin Jackson come in and get more work than he has? It's possible. But if Justin Jackson sees 10 carries, Eckler's probably going to see 16 or 17. So I'm hardly worried about that. Christian McCaffrey facing the Houston Texans in Houston. Like I said, 5.5-point dogs here. It hardly matters, though, in a spot like this because he's going to be involved in the passing game. I don't think that's a huge concern. But, of course, he is the most expensive running back on the slate at 8,800 on DraftKings. So that, at least makes you think about it. The next closest is Dalvin Cook at 8,300. But what do you think the value of McCaffrey is in this spot against the Texans?
Yeah, so I just think it's slate context, and he's like clearly just the highest ceiling play on the slate, in my opinion. And honestly might be the highest floor play, even with Eckler facing Miami. McCaffrey, the only thing I'll say here is like the position's really thin. Houston's interior defense against the run has just been really good, like maybe one of the best in the league. Now their overall run defense is just atrocious because
31st.
31st. Like you have DJ Reader in like the middle of that defense who's just been an absolute animal, and really that's it. There's 2 guys on the interior that have been really good, so just don't run towards the middle and you'll be fine. So McCaffrey, like in terms of having his 76-yard rushing touchdown career high up the middle last week, I doubt you see anything like that, but we know this guy's versatility. He's going to run outside the tackles more so anyways. And yeah, once you get him in the receiving game. So 8,800 on a slate where you don't have the other heavy hitters like Saquon, Zeke, and even Kamara. Yeah, I'm gonna be getting to him. I'm gonna try and prioritize him in cash and GPP lineups and just see where I get from there. Do I think he's like needed as a lock? No, not at all. Like if you're playing 10 lineups, I wouldn't have 100% of him. But yeah, I think he's clearly just the most talented and highest ceiling running back on the slate.
Yeah, I think there's no real discussion in that sense. And one of the reasons for that, Sal, is Dalvin Cook faces a very, very difficult task going up against the Chicago Bears. I mean, he's been phenomenal. So far the best fantasy running back in the league, but this is a really, really difficult spot for Dalvin Cook, especially if you're paying a premium for him.
Yeah. Right now I have Dalvin Cook on my tab as a no early in the week, just because of the price tag that you're paying. He's now finally priced up to probably where he should be, but you're getting him to come into this game. Just a couple of things, like on the road as an underdog, not great, a low total game overall, but his team has a 18.25 implied total against just a really, really good front. Like this Chicago front, when the Eagles are fully healthy, like they're right there in terms of how intimidating they are. But this Chicago front has just been so good. Like now, even more so this year, just guys who really didn't contribute that much last year are just even stepping up as well. So I don't want to be getting there. The passing game work helps a little bit for Dalvin Cook, but I would expect this game, and I'm really surprised to see that the total they have, or at least the spread they have on it, I would expect this game to be more so on Kirk's shoulders, and that's never great for Minnesota.
It's never. And I actually think, not that this is a surprise, but the Bears defense could come heavily into play here. And honestly, with how well they've played, I'm surprised they're not the most expensive defense, even against the team that, isn't the Miami Dolphins. So outside of the top tier guys, it kind of falls off kind of quickly because you have Barkley that's not there. Melvin Gordon, of course, isn't playing. Todd Gurley has not looked great this year, whether it's volume, but also efficiency. 3.1 yards per carry against Cleveland, 3.9 against New Orleans. He was much better against Carolina, but didn't really get involved heavily till late. Hasn't been a fixture of the passing game. It's been tough. I'll be more than willing to get to Todd Gurley, but I don't really feel the need to pay for him right now, and I can come down into that 6K range or get up above him to the McCaffreys and the Ecklers. It's kind of no man's land for me when it comes to that Gurley price.
Yeah, I mean, I was like week 1 and 2 a huge Gurley truther, and he gets season high snaps, 74%. But like if you actually watch the snaps, he just did not look good. Like the burst factor for Todd Gurley,
gone.
I've yet to see it. Like week 1, we saw like one play in the second half when they were closing out that game. He hit a hole. But that whole last game, he was used pretty good. Like only Malcom Brown, 26% of the snaps, not much usage overall. But yeah, especially against this Tampa Bay defense that I think right now they're top 5 in run defense, and they just look so stout. I wouldn't face a lot of running backs against them, especially one that seems like his ceiling factor of just hitting a hole and exploding is gone. And especially in the passing game too, they're just not going to him.
Yeah, I can't get there, honestly. And another thing too, if we're just talking about, who's priced around him, who's viable, I think we need to at least get into a conversation when it comes to Marlin Mack, because he is seeing a ton of carries, right? He's got 61 carries through 3 games. Efficiency's been up and down, particularly against Tennessee. He struggled a bit, but still had 20 carries. On the year, though, through 3 games, averaging just shy of 5 yards per carry. And now, after seeing no work in the passing game week 1, he's got 6 targets over the last 2 games. I'm a fan of Marlon Mack, especially if T.Y. Hilton's out. And one reason for that is not Oakland's run defense is absolutely atrocious. No, it's not. It's probably right in the middle of the league. That's fine. But just the flow of this game should really favor Marlon Mack. They're 26-point implied total. They're a touchdown favorites at home. It's hard for me to envision a way in which, and I'm not saying they don't throw at all, but it's hard for me to envision a way in which Marlon Mack doesn't come close to 20 carries again.
Yeah, I really like Marlon Mack at that price tag. You already said all the really good stuff. A really good favorite here at home for a running back. 26 total. He's running a lot of routes, so there's also passing upside. Like last week, he came into that game and they were saying that he was going to be somewhat limited. He touched the ball a total of 18 yards for over 80, or 18 times for over 80 yards and a touchdown. And now he does have what I would say just beneficial total. 3rd worst tackling team, or bottom 5 in tackling, Oakland. Their run defense overall, I believe, is bottom 10 right now. So a lot of that's just hinged on Dalvin Cook and really all of Minnesota just handing the ball nonstop last week. But Marlon Mack looks really good this week. And the idea that he's not being utilized in the receiving game, he is. He's running a lot of routes. He caught 2 balls on 3 targets last week. It's not going to be 8 target type game for Marlon Mack, but you probably have a 4-point cushion too most weeks in the receiving game of Marlon Mack. So yeah, at that price tag on this slate, that's very, very juicy.
Tell me how you feel about Carson after losing 3 fumbles in the first 3 weeks.
Yeah, I can't get to him, and I would be worried if owning him in a season long. Like, I think there's a real chance he sees if Penny comes back this week. It's like 50% of the snaps for Chris Carson, and that might be favorable because
I bet he
Procise,
sees less than that if Penny comes
yeah,
back healthy.
yeah, I was gonna say because Procise took over and looked absolutely fine on playing the majority of the snaps, and at least manageable. Definitely a better receiving game option, it seemed, and that's how he's kind of been his thing all along. But if Penny comes back after playing like 35% of the snaps in that last game, yeah, it's scary to even think about getting to Carson this week, even to like the most contrarian people.
In all seriousness, I have interest in Rashad Penny if he comes back healthy. I mean, normally it would have to be a spot that's favorable, but it is.
Yep.
They're probably going to be able to run a ton of plays in this game. He's not expensive, and if you look at his production, he had that 37 yard touchdown in week 2. He showed a little bit of burst. Basically showed what we didn't see at all last season. I think it's risky, but in tournaments, and we haven't talked about it. You may disagree, but in tournaments, I don't mind getting to a little bit of Penny, assuming he comes back fully healthy and not limited.
Yeah, if you're playing 150 or just a lot of lineups, then yeah, I think he's somebody that should be in a player pool. He would be the one if he plays that I would want to get to. I would expect him to see at minimum like probably 40 to 50%, if not more, of the carries or the overall snaps. If Rashad Penny's out again, I still don't want Chris Carson. Like I would rather have Procise. Procise becomes actually a really viable play as a pass catching guy in a nice total against Arizona at that point.
Yeah, I mean, in week 2, Carson saw 54% of snaps and Penny saw 33. So I could see that. I could see that flipping on its head and getting Penny up around 55, 60. It's very possible, especially if Seattle's playing with a lead, which wouldn't be even a little bit surprising. So, yeah, it's a really fascinating spot or really situation in Seattle to see what happens with health and to see how Carson's workload breaks out or shakes out now that he has really struggled to hold on to the football. Is there anyone else in this range that you're interested in from? Well, you know what? I'll just ask you. Anyone from 5K or up that we haven't touched on that you're interested in?
Yeah, I got a couple of guys on here. So I think that 5K and up, I think David Johnson's interesting because of the context of the slate. He's at a favorable price point and just being heavily utilized overall in the field. But as a receiver, still, we saw last week, was on the field for 85+% of the snaps. So not a great running back spot as an underdog, but he's at home. And honestly, I don't really care that he's an underdog because he'll be used as a receiver a decent amount. The total is not great, but on this sort of a slate, he has to be in play. I do prefer Marlon Mack for cheaper. Kerryon Johnson, I have a lot of interest in. The only worry for me is the fact that this game, like any Chiefs game, could be like a 3 touchdown difference, and he's just factored out completely. But 75% of the snaps last week had 20 touches on the ground. It just turned into just an ineffective game. But we saw nothing come up for Ty Johnson with C.J. Anderson gone. And if that's going to indicate anything, it's going to indicate a very good rest of the season and just opportunity-wise for Kerryon Johnson. Might not be the week as an underdog against the Chiefs, but the Chiefs right now, I think they rank just dead last in rush defense. Yeah, they rank dead last in rush defense right now. The only problem there is, like, do you think this game gets out of hand? But I have a good amount of interest at that price tag in Kerryon and hoping just people don't go to him because he, again, really didn't do much last week outside of one play.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of chatter in our YouTube chat regarding Mark Ingram. A lot of people saying he's underrated. A lot of people saying he's just taking advantage. And by a lot of people, I mean a couple. That he's taking advantage of an easy schedule, which, I mean, in terms of run defense, in terms of the run game, there's no question that he's had a cakewalk. But he has been fine. He has been targeted in the passing game a lot. And now you've got the Cleveland Browns coming in. Run defense DVOA this season. Cleveland ranks, I think, 20th on Football Outsiders. Run defense, according to Pro Football Focus. You've got Cleveland around 19th as well. So they haven't been fantastic. But do you think Ingram is worth the price here?
Yeah, I think he's worth the price because he's just because of the slate. Most weeks I would say no. I'm just not sure how much I prioritize him over like Marlon Mack, who's cheaper, over David Johnson, who's a little bit more expensive there, and then just other guys around him. We haven't even talked about Leonard Fournette, who's just been so inefficient, but on the field 100% of the snaps last week, getting a ton of work in the passing game. So Mark Ingram, for me, it's going to come down probably to what honestly, the Browns secondary looks like. Because if the Browns secondary looks like what it did on Sunday night against the Rams, I would expect a lot more pass emphasis from this Ravens team because they were down 4 defensive backs, 4 of their 5 best defensive backs. If they're missing those guys or some of them once again, I probably lean more so to getting to Lamar Jackson and some of the Hollywood Browns rather than Mark Ingram. But yeah, I mean, there's upside for a guy who is probably going to be in the red zone a lot. Only 60% of the snaps the past 2 weeks, but it just doesn't matter by the amount of plays that this team is running.
If you took that 61-yard run, or I'm sorry, if you took the 69-yard run away from Leonard Fournette last week, do you want to take a guess what his yards per carry would have been? Take a guess.
What his yards per carry would have been? Oh, that's a good one because I knew he had it's probably, I don't even know. He would have been at negative total yards, right? So negative something.
Yeah, negative 0.2.
Negative 0.2. Oh my
God. Negative 0.2. He ran for 69 yards and finished with 66 yards on the game. Dude, he's been atrocious. And
yeah.
I know you're right in the sense that getting the carries or getting the snaps and really all of the work in the backfield is something that you have to hold in high regard. But dude, he has been so lost, and I don't know, man. His first 10 carries, he lost yardage or had a no gain on 8 of them last week.
Yeah, he looked terrible. He's been just so such a bad, however people weight yards per carry, but just such a bad efficiency running back his entire career. The only reason he's viable right now and has a floor in any format is because he's running the second most routes out of running backs or just 100% of the snaps. So if this team gets into the red zone, low total. So right now he's listed as a no on my sheet. But I have Mark Ingram as a maybe. So they're pretty close, at least where I'm at, just because of the receiving game. But yeah, I mean, per carry, it's not great. It's just a matter of he's on there a lot. He's going to find at least 2 touchdowns this year. Would expect to get in the end zone. Can you get that week? $6,000 I think is favorable. The matchup's not great. So yeah, he's going to stay a no right now for me. I slightly lean Mark Ingram there, but it's a little bit closer, at least for me.
And give me quick thoughts on Derrick Henry.
Yeah, Derrick Henry, I think you have to pick your spots with him, and I don't think this is the spot. I think that Tennessee is going to need to use their passing game a little bit more. Derrick Henry, I mean, he's only been on the field. When he's on the field, he gets the ball.
50%, yeah.
Yeah, 50%. He's in a split in terms of snaps. It's just the fact that he's on the field when you want to run, which really isn't great for his his outlooks in terms of the defense knowing what's happening. But yeah, I stick to Tennessee's passing game really just so much so Delaney Walker here in this matchup. The only other thing that stands out, Justin Jackson, I do think is a fine play. I guess talking about Devonta Freeman is somewhat in maybe not important, but just worth a mention that Ito Smith went out on the first drive of the game with a concussion. We'll monitor that. If Ito Smith is out, Devonta Freeman looked fine. He had the far majority of his production on 2 25-yard runs, and he just got a ton of snaps. So if people are just looking at straight snap counts, the reason you see him having 90% of the snaps is not because he just all of a sudden just broke free as the main guy, as he probably should be, but it was because Ito Smith went down in the first drive of the game. Tennessee top 10 in run defense per Pro Football Focus. So not something I want to get to, but if people are just getting overhyped because they saw the usage, it's because there was an injury.
Okay. And lastly, against the Giants, Chris Thompson has been really just heavily involved in the passing game, which should come as no surprise. He actually saw 7 carries last night, 5 targets again. He now has 10, 8, and 5 targets over the first 3 games of the season, double-digit fantasy points in each of those 3. They really lack weapons outside of Mcclaren, and Adrian Peterson certainly isn't the same guy that we've expected to see. Chris Thompson's leading this team in snaps, leading running backs in snaps by a pretty wide margin here. What do you think of him and Peterson? Obviously not both of them together, but against this Giants defense in what should be a ugly yet competitive game.
Yeah, I much prefer Chris Thompson just in terms of I don't think you need to try and get to AP in cash, especially now that the price has come up from what it was. And Chris Thompson is the guy who actually has a ceiling for tournaments. The price point is fine. I just, in that range, I'm going to get to more Justin Jackson and probably even Wayne Gallman, just in terms of usage and matchup. It's a really good matchup, really good price point. game flow dependent should kind of lean his way for most of that, either neutral or just being trailing. But I just don't get there over Justin Jackson and Wayne Gallman. And I want to see with Devin Singletary how bad of an injury that was. I know it's a hamstring, but I'm curious. Not a great spot this week, but I haven't seen anything on that.
Yeah, I haven't either. I was actually trying to look that up earlier. Didn't come across much. All right. Let's talk wide receivers here. We mentioned we have a decent amount of them. We're not going to cover everybody, but starting at the top, of the wide receivers that really stand out early on, I want to get your take on them. Keenan Allen, of course, he leads the league in air yards by a wide margin and leads the league in yards and has just really been downright dirty. So like everything we've seen from Keenan Allen has been wildly impressive. His target counts over the first 3 weeks are pretty insane. He's got 10, 15, and 17. Check this out. So he has 42 total targets. The wide receivers on this team overall have, 73. So he has 58% of the total wide receiver targets through the first 3 weeks of the season, which is really quite incredible. His market share of targets is, his market share, I should have just pulled it up, but is 37%. It's insane what Keenan Allen's been doing with the Chargers.
Yeah, he's a fantastic play once again. Like, just every single thing you touched on is what I would have said. Just the usage is insane. He's being heavily utilized in the slot more so than he was last year when he was being used a lot because no Tyrell Williams.
Which is nice with Xavier Howard on this Miami team.
Yeah, exactly. And even if like Xavier Howard was to follow Keenan Allen into the slot, I'm not that concerned. Like Keenan Allen wasn't by any means shut down by Darius Slay being shadowed into the slot, and just it's the amount of volume he's getting. And then also like I don't know how much to weigh it, but I was watching some things on Twitter about just Xavier Howard's like efforts last week, and
terrible.
It doesn't look good. There's 2 to 3 plays where like the first move he just barely gets beat, not even really beat by Amari Cooper, and then he's just like jogging, and Cooper's got like a 20-yard catch. One was for I think the touchdown play.
Well, wasn't he defending him on the second touchdown where it looked like he ran like a post, and I thought it was right at the goal line basically. Maybe not, but you're right. The effort there looked underwhelming to say the least. Xavier Howard had shadowed Amari twice in the last year and shut him down both times. Yeah. I'm not saying it's going to happen every time, but he's one of the best cover corners in the league, and it did not look like it at all last week.
Yeah, exactly. Like last week, there was definitely plays that he was taking off. I don't know how much that translates. And again, I don't know if they actually try and I would shadow him on Keenan, even if he goes into the slot. That happened a little bit with Amari. Amari doesn't really go into the slot. It was like 2 or 3 plays last week. But yeah, Keenan Allen, it's hard to get away from 7,600 against this defense. He's going to still see double-digit targets, maybe not the 17 ceiling, especially because I don't expect this game flow to really need Phillip Rivers in the fourth quarter that much. But yeah, it's hard to not like Keenan Allen for really any format. And like the idea of just getting away from him would really just come down to there's a couple of other plays that are up here and ownership, but I don't think you get too far away.
Okay. Pro Football Focus does not have him being shadowed by Xavier Howard. I mean, obviously, we don't know, right? It's not like you're not going to look at this and be like, okay, well, now we know for sure that won't be the case. But I don't know. I don't think he will. And like you said, even if he does, I'm not nearly as concerned after what I saw with Amari Cooper, because I was not very high on Cooper last week for that very reason. Fortunately, was high on Keenan Allen and Mike Evans, so it didn't hurt me, but I was super worried in the 1 p.m. wave of games where Amari was doing anything he wanted. Julio Jones against Tennessee, DeAndre Hopkins against Carolina, looking to bounce back from a couple underwhelming games. What do you make of Odell Beckham against Baltimore? Just pointing out these 7K plus guys. Mike Evans against the Rams. I think Keenan is my number one guy, but I could definitely see guys like Hopkins and Julio breaking the slate if they come in with lower ownership. And depending on where Odell Beckham lines up, that could be a very interesting matchup as well.
Yeah. Right now, like Keenan, he's going to stand out in projections, and anything is probably like the better play here among these guys. But I really like Julio. It's a matter of ownership, one, for how much my interest grows or reduces, and just because of the price tag. but I think it's just a crush spot for him. Whether it's Malcom Butler has been dreadful this year on the outside in coverage. Adoree Jackson has been like okay at best. This is just a smash spot against a team in Tennessee that'll play more man to man, which again is just going to allow Julio to do whatever he wants. I will say though that's going to help Calvin Ridley for sure when you have just a bad secondary in Tennessee and potential double teams on Julio. But really like Julio here. Right now, I have like a maybe listed for DeAndre Hopkins. I want to see what the ownership says on that one. It's just relative to all these other guys. He has one of the highest ceilings out of these guys, if not the highest in Hopkins. And it's a spot where if he goes lower owns, I'm going to get to him, but that's probably really going to be an ownership play. Odell, I want to see what happens with Jimmy Smith. Again, if Jimmy Smith misses another week, that Ravens secondary splits without Jimmy Smith. They're dramatic, and that defense gets a lot worse without him. So, yeah, Odell, my interest will rise if Jimmy Smith's out. So a lot of things like contingent on ownership for me and just injuries. Mike Evans, I'll say Marcus Peters so far has actually looked like himself from a couple of years ago. Looked really bad last year, but so far this year he's looked pretty good. On the other side, Talib has looked terrible. So I imagine them to put Marcus Peters on Mike Evans for most of that game, which will give a little bit of like a softer matchup to Perriman on the other side against Talib, but it's kind of a non-factor. In that game, I look more so to Chris Godwin in the slot.
You know, I think there are times where you can get some of the biggest edge by targeting really good players that are low owned because other players in that same price tier are very popular.
Exactly, yeah.
And while there's no way that I'm just going to be fading Keenan Allen across 150, I would imagine I'll have plenty of him in such a concentrated offense. If Julio and Keenan are pulling ownership away from Hopkins, he's just too good of a player to not get the attention he deserves. So even though it's not, a spectacular matchup, I just think there's always something to be said for, hey, he's one of the preeminent receivers in the world, and he can go off any single game against anyone. If he's 3 or 4% owned, I don't think I'll have any choice but to go overweight on him.
Oh, 100%. Like if I'm playing 3 maxes and I see DeAndre Hopkins is that low, he's getting into at least 2 of the lineups probably,
right?
Just to overweight the field. Because here's the thing, like you have Bradbury who will be up against him. By no means is that intimidating for Hopkins. Like the best shutdown corner in the league, potentially you can argue Stephon Gilmore or Jalen Ramsey. I'll say Ramsey has lost more times than not against DeAndre Hopkins. So I have no worry in the world against his matchup. So really, like exactly what it is. We know how good of a player he is. His price point's up there with those guys. If he gets lost in the shuffle of Keenan Allen just being a monster so far, and Julio for his own sake being a monster so far, yeah, if I see single-digit ownership, which is probably likely or more likely than ever this week on Hopkins, yeah, I'm going to be making sort of a play there. Like if you have 7% Hopkins to a 25% Keenan Allen, it seems like an easy pivot for at least a decent amount of your lineups to get to him.
Yeah, and just last one, you touched on it a little bit, but let's assume Jimmy Smith is out. Marlon Humphrey's been good, but Odell's the type of receiver that you'll likely see him lined up everywhere, right? I mean, really his snaps I'm pretty sure they're almost a third left side slot, right? Maybe a little bit less in the slot, but do you think just moving him around would be enough to really give him an opportunity to produce in a big way?
Yeah, I mean, I just think with like any wide receiver in general, you just have to move the players around. Like your best players should be getting put into the slot. We've seen it multiple weeks. People just take advantage of that. We've seen that's really why Keenan Allen has been exploding so far this year, in my opinion, is obviously just peppered with usage, but because he's just dominating players in the slot or other cornerbacks who are usually like the third string cornerback. So if I knew that Odell was going to go into the slot where Baltimore's already down to a second string cornerback to start the year, yeah, then I would like that a lot more. This is like very fascinating, these top 4 guys in terms of
man.
Yeah, in terms of what we see on ownership, because how soft the running back spot is this week, and really anywhere that you can go anywhere really each week with quarterback and tight end. Like this is probably the stand that you have to take. It's just always wide receiver so deep. Like we'll get to the 6K range, it's shredded and deep. But when you're paying up, yeah, I would heavily utilize the site's ownership if you're somebody who plays tournaments. If you're somebody who plays cash, yeah, Keenan Allen's probably the play there.
Yeah, I hate to be so definitive in saying stuff like this, but if these top 4 guys somehow decided to slate, it wouldn't be the biggest surprise. Just based on all of them being able to erupt. And if Keenan Allen's ownership is 30+%, which I think it will be pretty close, that could change a lot. What about the 6K range? I'll just rattle off a couple of them. Thielen, very difficult matchup. And, if you played him last week, you should be thanking your lucky stars. You got bailed out on that that rushing touchdown. He only had 5 targets. Diggs hasn't been targeted. I mean, you should be concerned regardless about these pass catchers for the Vikings right now. Cooper Kupp had easily his best game of the season, erupted for 11 receptions on 12 targets, 102 yards, and 2 scores. Huge game. He's got a Tampa Bay secondary that is clearly shown massive holes, huge warts. We saw it with Daniel Jones and their inability to hold them after taking an early first half lead. And then, of course, Tyler Lockett, who, if there were any concerns about Metcalf being the number one guy, and I even said it after week 1 that I wouldn't be surprised just based on his size if that happened. That is not the case. Lockett's seen 26 targets over his last 2 games. He is who we thought he would be heading into the season. And then Cooks and Woods and Godwin. Godwin saw his price tag drop from 6,900 to 6. Very interesting range as well here, Sal.
Yeah. A lot of guys that are just jammed in that I usually like getting to, and they're all now priced up somewhat to that mid 6K range instead of low 6, high 5. So I'll start from the top. 6,700. Sammy Watkins is probably still going to get just not the ownership he deserves. A guy who, for the most part, through a 2 small game sample, has probably been very unlucky, if anything, just in terms of not falling into the end zone on deep passes from Patrick Mahomes. Like, still getting targeted heavily. Like, it should be something that people look at as negative that he hasn't been like performing in terms of like overall ceiling games for the last 2 weeks as opposed to week 1. But it should be like something that's a bright spot, the fact that he's still getting peppered with this many targets, having good games aside from not finding the end zone while other players are going off in the offense. Like, it's going to regress a little bit. So yeah, Sammy Watkins, and if he's going to be in the slot, was in the slot 80% 2 weeks ago, was in the slot this last week 66%. So he'll be in the slot. So really Darius Slay being out won't matter too much. But I like Sammy at 6,700. Just makes that tough pricing range even tougher. No interest.
Let me just jump in quickly if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
I totally overlooked him. Sammy Watkins is also one of my favorite receivers this week. I liked him a lot last week. It didn't come through, but you really nailed it. Like, you can't just look at the production because Mahomes can get points wherever he wants, but Sammy Watkins still leads this team in targets. He has still been a focal point of the offense. 32 targets through 3 weeks. No other receiver has more than 12 total targets on the season. Kelsey with 25, but 32 for Watkins. No, I'm 100% with you here. And I think, if people are just looking at production, you may see his ownership come down even further than it was last week. And against this Detroit team, I think there's a ton of upside. So yeah, I just wanted to add on to that. Go ahead.
Yeah. And just like to finish it off, like he's just on the field nonstop, 95% plus of the snaps. And you have guys last week that are getting the headlines like Mecole Hardman, who looks fantastic, but caught 2 balls on 5 targets. Robinson, hell of a catch, looks good in 2 weeks, on the field a lot, but only 4 targets. Like, he's looking Sammy Watkins' way more so than anybody in this offense. And that's eventually going to pay off like it did week 1 again. And I'm just going to keep playing it because, yes, so we loved him last week and he had a decent game and didn't come through. It's a 1-game sample. Nothing changes at all. And if anything, he'll probably continue to have lower ownership. So, yeah, like Sammy Watkins, no interest in Thielen with the matchup, and he's only in the slot 25% of the time. And then you touched on it, just the overall volume in this offense is not great. Julian Edelman, if he plays, slight interest, but relative to this range, not a lot, just like that he's facing his own defense. It's just so loaded. Don't expect T.Y. Hilton to play. I say that Tyler Lockett in this entire range is probably my favorite play when you factor in matchup. He was in the slot on 80% of his routes last week, or his snaps. Like, that's a lot for a guy who I was expecting like to see 66% and feel really good about. 80% last week, and what did he do? He went absolutely off. So really good spot for him, that whole offense. So Tyler Lockett with his price point is probably the most mispriced in this range for me. So I really like Sammy on the top end. The middle of the pack, Tyler Lockett. And then right at the bottom, I like Chris Godwin. I think Godwin fits into a lot of lineups so far pretty easily. I think that on the outside, Marcus Peters has looked good, which should slow at least a little bit what we saw from Mike Evans last week. And I think people are just going to forget about Godwin after 1 week, although he was on the field by far the most out of those receivers, and he's still playing in the slot on an offense he ran where they're going to run a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. 73% of the time he was in the slot last week. So I'll go right back to Godwin in really any format.
Okay. So will I. I also think you're going to see a lot of these games where one of them is Evans, one of them is Godwin. You're going to see them switch off. Just hope you get it right. But it's and I'm not saying they both can't have big games because they can. It's unlikely that Evans is going to come back out and, drop 190 and 3 touchdowns with 3 of them coming in all 3 of them in the first half. I mean, I love Mike Evans. any concerns that anyone had should be quelled after that last game. But Godwin's not just going to go overlooked like he did in week 2. All right, let's close it out with some value here, and then we'll hit on tight ends and make our way out of here. Which, by the way, awesemo.com/join is where you can sign up and get 50% off your first month of premium NFL, all access, the Awesemo Plus membership. The promo code is NFL Strategy. And if you're watching live, you don't need this, but if you're watching after we've recorded and it's up on YouTube, click right here above me, above our heads, NFL Strategy. It'll take you right there to sign up and get 50% off your first month. It includes ownership projections, player projections for all of our sports, the top stack tools for all sports where it's applicable. We've got it for football now. The Fantasy Cruncher add-on, the best optimizer in the game, and of course, lineup study, which is hugely, hugely beneficial to anyone looking to better their game and learn from players that are good. The lineup builder, of course, all of our premium articles and so much more. So use the promo code NFL Strategy, click right up here and head over to awesemo.com/join, or just click it, of course, and get 50% off your first month. We also have an express package, $3.95 a week. You can see everything that entails on awesemo.com/join and check out all of our packages. And say what's up in the premium Slack chat. When you do, introduce yourself, welcome yourself to the family. We're a friendly bunch. All right, Sal. Some cheap guys. We could get into Terry McLaurin a little bit. He's underpriced. Before we do, I'll ask you quickly, anybody in the 5 to 6K range, from the Gordons to the Shepherds to the Fitz to the Kirk to the Galladay, those type of guys? Go ahead. Floor's yours.
Yeah, so Larry Fitz, he's just on the field too much. 94% of his routes last week were in the slot. He continues to be a very good cash play with a high floor in that offense. Fine for tournaments, but I prefer it in cash if you wanted to get there. And then his other teammate, Christian Kirk, seems to be the favorite target, 83% of the time in the slot. If that game, if Kyler Murray just didn't absolutely fall apart in the second half, you were in for a big day of Kirk. He had, I think, just 8 targets and like 6 or 7 catches in the first half alone. So those guys still stand out. The Kansas City wide receivers just aren't priced up enough in Robinson and Hardman. I still prefer Hardman over Robinson, even though Robinson's looked fine and is on the field more these past 2 weeks. I just like the big play upside for tournaments. Don't want either in any sort of cash format. And that's really it. The last thing I guess I'll say is that if Denzel Ward misses again, Marquis Brown is just a fantastic play, Hollywood Brown. But I expect him to play because he was close to playing that last game. But keep an eye on Cleveland's secondary. So, yeah, really just so the mispricings of the Kansas City. And I don't know how Christian Kirk's price doesn't change from last week.
You want to talk about some value receivers here?
Yeah, let's do it.
I don't know if you saw the tweet of mine. If you did, just tell me. If not, I'm going to ask you and see if you can get it right because you're a pretty sharp fella. Did you see my air yards tweet yesterday?
I did not see your air yards tweet.
Okay. Keenan Allen leads the league in air yards this season. Okay. Behind him is Mike Evans and then Marquis Brown. Who do you think is 4th in air yards? Take a wild guess.
Yeah, I kind of saw this last week, so I'm going to assume he was 2nd last week. Is it Parker?
It is Devontae Parker. Yes.
I saw that last week that he was 2nd, which is just nuts.
Incredible. Devontae Parker 4th in air yards behind Allen, Evans, and Marquis Brown. So I guess what I'm getting at is I don't like to overweight any stat. Like, okay, cool. A lot of air yards. Is the ball anywhere near him when it's thrown? Is he getting open? Right? Like, those things are important. But if you're getting opportunities deep down the field, it's at least relevant. And he's had 7 and 6 targets over his first 3 games. He's been on the field for 92 and 96% of the snaps over the last 2 weeks. We'll have to keep an eye on whatever Albert Wilson's injury status is, but we can get there when necessary. And then Preston Williams has played 96% of snaps, saw 12 targets last time out. So these are 2 players that are on a really bad football team, but a team that, still has to throw. And whether we like them or not, they're here. So what are your thoughts on Preston Williams and Devontae Parker this week against the Chargers?
Oh, yeah. I have Preston Williams as a yes right now. So last week, Preston Williams was like my in terms of like milli maker lineups, nothing in like three max or single entry. Milli maker lineups, he was like my pivot off of away from Aguilar, which didn't end up working out for me at all. But everything that happened for him last week was fantastic. Like if you look at the trend, week 1 didn't play much. Week 2 led the team in targets, played 68% of the snaps, plays 96% of the snaps last week, sees 12 targets, sees a touchdown in the end zone that if they review it, it's probably still called not a touchdown, but it was like a reviewable catch where he had like 3 steps in and then he drops the ball at the end or like slides out. So also in that game, a flea flicker where he was underthrown on, he makes the catch, but he's wide open for another. So this guy was getting open all around the field. Josh Rosen had the most time with Preston Williams in the preseason with the second team. They played together in games and had a little bit of a connection through a small sample. And it seems like it's coming alive now. Last week when Rosen came in, he was looking Williams' way. This entire game, he was looking Preston Williams' way. Preston Williams is a really talented kid who probably made like the catch of the year in the preseason. And then it was just called back for him, like barely stepping out of bounds. I really like Preston Williams at that price point another week. And like the guy had all the opportunity in the world last week. Everything seemed to go wrong, and he still had 4 catches for 68 yards. So, yeah, in game scripts where they're going to be passing the ball a lot, I like it. In a game where Devontae Parker, I would imagine, sees Casey Hayward in this one, and then you're probably going to get Jakeem Grant in the slot facing Desmond King. It seems like the best matchup is against the backup cornerback for Preston Williams on the other side. I really like this at 3,900. Obviously not a cash play or anything like that, although the usage is there. But yeah, in tournaments, big, large field tournaments, I like Preston Williams this week. And the price point only comes up $200. It's crazy.
Man, I'm with you. Preston Williams ran 14 routes in week 1. Yep. 14 routes in week 1 and still saw a little bit of involvement. 33 in week 2 and then 46 in week 3. So it's not just that he's on the field, Sal. He's becoming far more involved and trusted each and every week.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is like for people watching. And last week, I tried to just get onto it as much as I could. And really, like, everything went well in terms of the opportunity. You can't be on the field and playing with them. I think that, like, we have to get on these sorts of things before they become mainstream, because if they're going to pass 40-plus times a game, Rosen, like, for the most part, didn't look terrible in terms of making catastrophic mistakes in that game. He was off on some throws, but a lot of the times his receivers were letting him down. I watched most of that last game. Yeah, Preston Williams is a guy who I could see being a 5K receiver very soon, and that means if he gets there that he's been playing well. So I would just say have some exposure to a player like that.
Do we both agree that that Mcclaren is in play at this egregious price point?
Yeah, Mcclaren is, like, once again, too cheap. He's the best sub $5,000 play. And then for me, right behind him is probably DK Metcalf.
Okay. What about, though, and this may come out of left field, but got to talk about him. What about Trey Quinn, who, if you're looking at routes run, he's run 117 on the year. It's behind Mcclaren by only 2 and ahead of Paul Richardson. From a snap count standpoint, he's played 97%, 79. I don't know what we saw last day. It hasn't updated for me yet. But then targets for him have been pretty consistent as well. 6, 7, and 7. He is on Draftkings minimum salary against the New York Giants. I know that he's not a high upside guy, right? You know, you've got Trey Quinn running most everything out of the slot. What is it? 80% of his routes out of the slot. But I mean, at minimum salary, a guy that's averaging 7 targets and is on the field a lot and is running a lot of routes, I don't think it's the craziest idea against arguably the worst defensive secondary in the league.
Yeah, this is funny. I have him as a maybe. If you're stacking for some reason or bringing it back, McLaurin's the obvious option, but not much upside. He honestly is like a serious consideration for cash games just because of like a 6 target floor. So that's probably where I look. It's just confusing to me how, he's running that many routes, like you were saying, and all that stuff. And he's priced right next to his other teammates in Kelvin Harmon and Sims Jr., who I don't even think Harmon might have either 0 snaps or routes run or very few.
It's like he literally hasn't been on the field this year.
Yeah, so I actually think at $3,000, he's like not a solid cash play because, like, if you get 10 points, you're happy out of him. But I think the floor on this guy is probably like 6, 7 fantasy points or really close to that. I mean, he's running out of the slot so many times. You're going to get 3 catches out of this guy, I think, every single game.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously what sucks is that, like, his ADOT, his yards per reception, it's dog shit. You know, let's not ignore that. But you're also talking about a guy that's seen 3 red zone targets this year. He's
Yep.
seen 3 looks in the red zone, and he scored in the red zone earlier this season in week 1. So it's not crazy to think that Trey Quinn could give you 5 for 50 and a touchdown against the Giants. And if he does, you're real happy at 3K. All right, Sal, anyone else at wide receiver? There's a lot. We can't get to them all, but anyone that stands out to you as someone we need to discuss?
Yeah, there was a lot that we were talking about. Nobody stands out. We touched on the Indianapolis wide receivers, Deon Cain, and Preston Campbell. So I would say no. Really, the main ones I want to talk about were the ones we already did in this range, which was Preston Williams, DK, and Mcclaren. I think they're the obvious below 5K, at least from my point of view, best plays.
Okay. Let's close it out, man. Tight end position. I don't have a ton here. Of course, Kelsey at the top is always in play. Zach Ertz and the Eagles are playing on Thursday night, so they're not available. Evan Engram is someone that you just have to think that he's going to be very heavily involved. Whether it was Manning or Jones, fine, but now no Saquon Barkley. Ingram's had opportunities in the red zone in each of their first 3 games. He's been targeted 14, 8, and 8 times, and seems like he has one of the highest floors of any player at his position, as we saw after week 2. I think it was actually you that pointed that out last week, that Evan Engram, despite a really ugly game on all fronts, still had 6 receptions for 48 yards on 8 targets and finished in the double digits for fantasy points.
Yeah, I mean the guy's floor is fantastic. He's the wide receiver 1 on that team, probably. I mean, Sterling Shepard came alive last week, but still, like, in terms of just big play upside and how much red zone usage he's going to get, yeah, he's the guy. And it was really good to see that, as expected, Daniel Jones would be looking his way, but just look there often. So Evan Engram at 5,700. It's like DraftKings is allergic to the $6,000 price range for tight ends. I mean, I think there was like Kittle there week 1,
yeah,
but they just don't have players, and this gap is so big between Kelsey and everybody else, as it probably should be. But like Ingram is not $15,000. I would say like worse. I would right now than a Kelsey. So yeah, you're getting him underpriced by honestly like $1,000. I would say.
Yeah, I really like him this week. What about Kelsey?
Yeah, Kelsey, like every single week, I'm going to keep saying if you take tight end tag off, 7,200 is a very good price point. It's just tough this week when we have to make decisions at the top end at wide receiver, and you probably want somebody there. So like, again, this week I'm still going to favor Sammy Watkins in that passing game over Kelsey, just due to pricing and like everything else at the tight end position right now. Ingram, we haven't even talked about Waller. There's other guys here that I'd rather get to, but yeah, if you land on Travis Kelsey 25, 30%, 40%, it's probably fine because he has the highest ceiling out of any of them, and more times than not the highest floor.
And the truth is, though, like, how much of a downgrade right now really is Evan Engram on a team that lost Barkley, team that's facing the Washington Redskins? Kelsey's always in play, and his ownership's probably going to be down. Ingram's will be up. But, in cash games, Ingram seems like the better savings, $1,500 savings. Waller's prices come up. He's coming off a huge game, man. He still hasn't found the end zone, but 13 receptions on 14 targets. He's now hauled in all but 3 of his 29 looks. He's averaging just shy of 10 targets on the year. He's been ridiculously impressive. Just after week 1 alone, I loved what I saw from this dude. And he's proving each week that he's been, he's there every single time. As a matter of fact, Sal, he has 29 targets. The next closest player on the team is Tyrell Williams with 17.
Yeah. Darren Waller is just absolutely ridiculous. I said before this game ended that he should be in the 6K range, so he's 5,200. He's too cheap too. Indianapolis last week, I liked Hooper a good amount because this team plays a zone and they'll funnel it to your running backs and they'll funnel it to your tight ends. And last week we saw that happen with Hooper in a game where really Freeman hasn't been involved in that Atlanta passing game, so a lot more went to the tight end. Now you have Oakland where they're saying they want to get Josh Jacobs involved in the passing game, but for the most part, even with Jalen Richard, haven't been using running backs in the passing game. Darren Waller is already the number 1 target on this team. He's fit the bill of Jared Cook in this offense and better, and now he's facing a team that just wants to let you throw 10-yard passes or like 7-yard passes to your tight end. So yeah, another like double-digit target week for Waller, who's averaged 9.67, so 10 targets a week right there with Ingram leading the league. Yeah, Darren Waller's hard to get away from as well. Like trying to differentiate between Darren Waller and Evan Engram is crazy that we're like talking about that right now at this point in the season, but I think that's where a lot of lineups come down to this week.
So do I. And I still think that the difference is I think the touchdown equity is lower with Darren Waller. Amazing saying that when I think Ingram's is higher with the Giants, but I do. I definitely think it is, and I think that will help make some decisions here. The Raiders have 18.75 implied total. The Giants are at, where are they at? They can't be there. I must have missed them.
I have 25.25.
Oh my God, I did have to keep scrolling. That's pretty wild. Yeah, so there you have it. Like, what is that? 6-7 points higher?
Yeah,
So,
it's definitely a better situation for Ingram.
Yeah, it's just a better situation. I think more touchdown equity helps. Any other guys from 4K and up, whether it be Olson, who's been fantastic. Everyone slept on him because of the injury. People hate guys that are out for a year from injury. Yep. Hooper, Delaney. We talked about Delaney. We don't have to get into him. I like him a lot. I know you're interested. And then Mark Andrews.
Yeah, the only things I have is a yes for I have 5 tight ends with a yes. We talked about the first 3. Then Delaney has a yes for me right now. Mark Andrews I have as an X. Look, I want to see what his health looks like. But like Cleveland, a team that 2-3 years ago, every week you just play tight end against them. Last year into this year, they've looked very good against the tight end position. So I will say that I'm not going to have too much or as much interest in Andrews as of right now. So, yeah, it's pretty much Delaney. Greg Olson for this week, I won't be getting there. The Texans, dating back to mid last year, have been a top 5 team against the tight end for fantasy. Greg Olson, fantastic last week. Been running a ton of routes. Been running just on the field a lot. Cardinals definitely helped him last week. So from the 4K range and above, it's right now for me just a yes on Delaney Walker.
And finally, any Vernon Davis, Will Dissly, any guys below 4K that intrigue you?
Oh, yeah. I want to see what the ownership on Will Dissly is. If it's not extremely high, I'll have some interest there because just Arizona against the tight end it's been a real thing through 3 weeks. And like their whole defense is obviously bad, but it seems like they don't know what to do against tight ends right now. But Will Dissly, yeah, I mean, he's not running a ton of routes. I think he's run like 54 routes so far this year, which if you're wondering where that ranks, it ranks right around like the Cameron Brates of the world. So nothing crazy. He's just finding himself in the end zone. When he's on the field, though, 50% of the snaps right around there, he is running routes. So overall, not high volume on his routes run this year, but when he's on the field, he's running routes, being utilized in the red zone. So 3,600, I think it's definitely intriguing for really all formats. I have him right now as a yes because of the matchup and just the way he's being utilized on this offense. So I want to see what the ownership is. If he's not being looked at, then yeah. If he's somehow getting a lot of ownership, then it becomes like just a pay up to get to Evan Ingram or Waller.
Yeah, bottom 5 in DVOA against tight ends this season. I don't have it pulled up. Do you have their fantasy points allowed to the position by any chance?
Yeah, I got it right here. It's crazy. It's this is right. 31.
No.
I have that right here. This might be wrong because like my next closest is like 18.
All right, well hold on. Let's go through it then. All right, hold on.
Last week Greg Olson had like 30, I think.
Greg Olson had
30
a monster game. Carolina, Baltimore, Mark Andrews had a monster game, and TJ Hockenson. You're right.
TJ Hockenson had 30 plus. Olson had right at 30, and then
you're right.
And you also have to factor in like whatever else they gave up to second, because like
of course,
Aiden Hurst had like 9 points the week that Mark Andrews went off, or 7. So yeah, I have 31.3 points. The next closest is Tampa Bay, giving up 20 points a game for DraftKings.
That is fantastic, unbelievable, man.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now. Andrews had 28. Boyle had about 3, and then Hayden Hurst had. Let me just pull it up. Hayden Hurst had 7. So 37 to the crazy. And Hockenson hasn't done shit since that first game. So I mean it's really incredible, especially how just easily these tight ends are getting loose after the catch. It's a good call, man. I wish it was not Will Dissly, but you know what? He's had some opportunities in the red zone. I think his red zone targets this season. Let me just make sure that I'm accurate here. Red zone targets on the year. Will Dissly has, come on. Here we are. He has 3. He has, 3 red zone targets on the season. And target wise, he's actually been involved. So not a ton in week 1, but 12 targets over the last 2 weeks. And as long as he's on the field, it's worth giving him a look. He's averaging 55% of snaps on the year. Those numbers are mind blowing though, Sal, on Arizona's defense versus tight ends.
They've been terrible. And it doesn't matter who you are. You could be a rookie in Hawkinson. You could be a guy coming off injury like Olson. It's been and also like to kind of prop up Disley. Mark Andrews played 53% of the snaps against Arizona and went off. Will Disley has been playing just about that much every single game. So he's obviously, I would say, not as talented. But when he's healthy, we looked last year before he got hurt, he was doing the same thing, catching red zone touchdowns. So 3,600 is the reason why he's interesting in the matchup.
All right. Well, what do you have else for us? Before I ask you that, I will ask you as the viewer, the listener, if you like the show, you want to see more, you want to help support us, hit us with a thumbs up and like the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell as well so you always know when we're dropping new content. It does, believe it or not, help us a ton, and it helps us continue to keep producing free content that we can put out here on YouTube for you each and every day. We appreciate you tuning in as always. Sal, close us out, man. Any final thoughts? And tell everyone where they can find you as always.
Yeah, no final thoughts right now. We'll be back on Thursday. I'll be here every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 11 a.m. You can follow me on Twitter at Sal Vetri DFS, and then I have a YouTube channel. It's just my name, Sal Vetri. So, yeah, really fun show.
Good stuff as always, man. Yeah, there it is. We're not going to hit on defense here. We can do that throughout the week. No point in wasting anyone's time, but there it is. Quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end. Hopefully we gave you some good information to get started off on the right foot for week 4 research. I'll be back here tomorrow with Chris Baggs breaking down ownership and early projections. And then, of course, Sal and I will be back full game-by-game breakdowns on Thursday right here on the NFL Strategy Show. It's been fun. Stick around throughout the day. Plenty of content coming up on awesemo.com and youtube.com/awesemo. Have a good one.